Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Leadership in Politics with Dr. Abraham. On the show with me today is Dr. James Moore, a novelist. He will share with us his new novel. In addition to being an author, he is also a professor of management and international business. Welcome, Dr. James. How are you?
Thank you, Dr. Abe. I appreciate you and the warm welcome and the kind words. It's nice to chat with you today.
Of course, welcome to the show. You were highly recommended by our friend, Dr. Maya. So it's a pleasure to have you on. You wrote a novel recently. We're going to share that with our audience. It's a novel of interest. We're going to share that with our audience. But before we go any further, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Would you like me to start? I've got a lot of things on my background. I've done a lot of things, Dr. Abe.
As briefly as possible so we can get into that. Yeah.
I can do that. I'm a former chef, a former Marine. I've been a teacher for quite some time. I've been a radio host. I've done YouTube shows, and as we discussed most recently, a novel.
You are located where? What city?
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's nice and toasty, but today it's only going to get up to about 112.
112. COVID is controlled there now? Are they controlled? Is it under control?
I really can't speak to it being controlled. I'm hearing a couple different things. Some folks are wearing masks, some are not. We just try to stay safe on our end.
Yeah, as long as we wear the mask and be safe to save others and also save ourselves. So welcome to the show. Let's go ahead and talk about the novel. How did the idea, where did the idea came from? You've been teaching as a professor, and then suddenly, or whenever the time came, and then you said, I want to write a novel. How did that come about?
Okay, so the idea had been in my head for years. Years ago, I'd watched a television show that was scientific in nature, and it talked about relationships and couples. And one of the things that they discussed was that when there's a couple and they spend time or distance apart, the male's body produces an inordinate amount of sperm. And so when they come back together and have relations, his body, after producing the sperm, some of it is designated as what they call killer sperm. And its job is to seek out, hunt, and destroy any foreign sperm that might be within the woman. And my thought was, what if one of those sperm actually fertilized an egg? Maybe that's where serial killers come from. And so I started playing with the idea just momentarily at the time. But later on in life, that thought kind of had stuck with me when we hear these stories about this person was a prolific serial killer, and this person did this, and this person did that. And I thought, maybe I'm onto something. And so that's how the idea came about. And around that idea, I just continued to build and answer questions that I had. For instance, Dr. Abe, let me ask you, have you ever met someone and you just instantly didn't really care for that person?
I wouldn't say yes.
Because
I'm the type is I don't prejudge. I don't know if you heard of the concept of suspend your judgment.
Yes.
I kind of mastered that process, and I don't really judge people until I become more aware of who they are. So my answer is no at this moment.
Okay, all right. I'm not knocking either way. But what I started looking at is, for me personally, I had met folks that when I first met them, there was something about them that didn't sit right with me. And then there's folks that I've met that right off the bat, we became the best of friends almost instantaneously. And I looked at, there were couples that met and over the next week or so got married, and they've been together for 50 years. And I started looking at why that happens, why that occurs. And so I tied that into the concept of the story that I was building. And it was based on the circumstances around your conception. Whether or not you were the killer sperm or the normal sperm, or I created a situation where perhaps both were present and one or the other got to fertilize the egg.
Is that like a science fiction genre?
It is, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm heading into that. Okay, tell me what's the name of the story, the name of the...
The name of the book is Sqerm, Sqerm. And I had a little fun with the name. If you look
you
at
changed it, so since as you're telling me, I gather what you're saying. So you changed the P to Q. Good.
I did.
That's smart. Okay.
So I kind of toyed with that. And what ended up happening is I came up with a lot of scenarios and things that we overlook each day. For instance, if you get a deep itch in your ear and you can't really get to it, a lot of people attribute that to allergies. In my book, that is the announcement that somebody of the opposite type is near you, and that's your kind of precognitive warning that is happening. So there were a lot of little things that I played with like that. Even when you see something out of the corner of your eye and you turn and it's not there, it's those little things. So the concept is rooted in science, but there's a little bit of sci-fi with it and with the story.
All right. So then you're already published. Your
Yes,
book
sir.
your book is published. How is it published?
It's through a publisher. It's through Newman Springs Publishing.
Since you started, you finished your book. How did you look for a publisher? Was it the only publisher you contacted? And then what was the deal with the publisher? Not necessarily monetary, just an overall, and then until you actually published. Take me through the journey.
Okay, so it started out as a script, and I converted that into a book. And because I had the script laid out, the book was easy to write.
Okay.
I actually just really crammed in, and I converted it in 30 days. But the process was the better part of a year because it took me a few months to get the scripts. It was 10 seasons, 10 episodes in the season. So once I had that, I looked at a few different publishers, and depending on who you go with, you're going to go through things. I'll put it that way. They put you through situations. But the publisher that I went with offered a comprehensive package that offered everything. And then they also offer you the conversion to a digital book as well. So you have the paperback, the digital, and they put you into what's called the Ingram Content Network, which gives you Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and a plethora of other.
Okay, so congratulations on that, James. So, but recently, in the middle of August, you launched the book. So you just recently launched it. So I wish you the best. I wish you the best in your launch. How do the people find your book?
Okay, you can go to Amazon, or you can go to Barnes & Noble, or if you go to my website, which is www.drjamescmoore. And I always have to clarify, it's James, middle initial C, last name Moore. A lot of folks think I'm saying Seymour. It's James C. Moore.
It's C, capital C, and then Moore, MOORE.com.
So, yes, drjamescmoore.com. And you can see a little preview of the book, what it's about, and then there's a couple of links if you would like to.
They can order it as well.
Investigate the book, yes, absolutely.
So in a nutshell, how does it end?
Well, the interesting thing, Dr. Abe, is this. It's the first of 5 books, and this just opens up the story. Okay. So the story centers around a young man who lost his mother and then his fiance. And when he comes home from the military to investigate, during his investigation, he stumbles into this phenomenon. But he doesn't understand it, so he and his brother get together and begin to do more research, and they meet another person with a piece of the puzzle. And as they start to put things together, they realize, oh, there's something going on here, but they're just scratching the surface. So they're just starting to understand that something strange. They haven't quite figured out what it is. That'll be in book 2, where the story opens up even more.
So it continues. You're planning 5 books, possibly more.
Yes, and I'm currently on about chapter 43 of the second one.
So is that what you always wanted to do? You want to write a novel?
I've always been a fan of sci-fi ever since I was a kid, and there was Buck Rogers and all the sci-fi shows and things like that. When I was little, I actually wanted to be a scientist. And what we decide when we're smaller and when we're older, sometimes those things change. They vacillate. And I guess I went into the military, and I got to be a scientist when I came out, but in the culinary field. So I still got to be a scientist, but just through the progression of life and the people that I've met, I ended up at the radio station. And the radio station got me working with folks who did filming. And the filming got me into my own show. And once I had my own show, this idea with the book started to blossom because I was in a different mind space, a different mind frame that I saw things that I did. You know how that is.
Of
Sometimes
course.
you have one lens and you move to another place, your lens changes, and my lens changed, and this idea grew in my head. And honestly, I was sitting in my office one day and I was explaining this story to my dad, like, hey dad, here's a story that I had in my head. I took it to my guys at the radio station. They said, no, we're not really interested. I said, what would be really cool if this was like a show or a movie? He was like, well, what's stopping you? And when he left my office, I ordered screenwriting software and installed it, and I started writing that day.
You just reminded me, recently I had a best-selling author, Paul Smith. He has a similar story where he asked his father about something happening in his life, and his father told him, same thing, something don't stop, but he said, I want you to achieve those things. I want to see your achievement in my lifetime. And the father was 80 years old, okay? You can just imagine the expectation he placed on the author.
Mm-hmm.
So this word from your dad and his encouragement changed your behavior, your attitude, and then you went ahead and you ordered whatever you wanted to do.
I did. And, I would like to give a shout out to all the dads out there. My dad is my biggest cheerleader.
How old is your dad?
He's 67.
67. That's wonderful. Congratulations to you and to him. And hello. What's his name, your dad?
My dad's name is Bruce Fisher.
Bruce, also. Okay, so you're like tearing up. You're like so emotional now. I caught you.
No. Can I share a personal story?
Yes.
Okay. So, and by no means am I trying to elicit sympathy. I grew up in the foster care system, and I didn't meet my dad until I was 25.
How old?
25 was the first time I met my
God
dad.
bless. Yes.
And for whatever reasons, it just wasn't in the cards for me until then. But the really cool thing is I went out to see my great grandmother in Sacramento, getting older in her years. But one thing I remember that she said is, she says, "You look just like that Fisher boy." And I thought, oh, okay. So she gave me his name, and this is, I'm gonna.
Oh, how interesting! I like where it's heading. Wow. Okay.
So she gave me his name, and I go back to Arizona, and I had a friend who had one of those CDs with the 80 million household names. And I said, hey, can you look up this guy in Oklahoma? And she said, sure, no problem. She returned the next day with 3 names. There were only 3 Bruce Fishers in Oklahoma. Randomly, I picked the one in the middle. And I called, he answered the phone. I said, are you Bruce Fisher? He said, well, yes, I am. I said, well, did you live in this area? Yes, I did. Did you date this person? Yes, I did. Do you know these people? Yes, I do. I said, I think you might be my dad. Now, I thought he would be like, oh my gosh, he was like, really? Well, let's send some pictures and find out. And that's how I met my dad. It was the coolest thing ever. And we have been like this, just tight as you could imagine ever since. And
the story you just shared with me, that's an Oprah story. It's an amazing story. You shared it with others, people know about it, and
I've shared it with a few folks.
Now everybody's gonna know about it. Somebody's gonna call you.
Well,
congratulations.
But no, thank you. It was just so cool because, for the longest time I wondered, and then I not only did I get the question answered, but I got like the world's greatest dad that came with that. And it's just, he's amazing.
Did you have to go through, I mean, your heart was your guide, but did you have to go through DNA testing and all of that to prove he is your dad, or you just went to a gut feeling and that's it, he's my dad?
Well, it's interesting you bring up the DNA test because after I had known him for a couple of years, I traveled to Oklahoma for a family reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that happened is that he worked for a gas company at the time. And someone knocked on his door, and I answered the door. And the guy says to me, Bruce, turn my gas on. And I said, I'm sorry, sir, you're looking for my dad. He says, no, Bruce, quit playing around. Turn my gas on. I said, hold on, let me get my dad. And we both came to the door. The guy was, he was just kind of dumbfounded.
The proof is in the pudding.
It was. And then I went to the family reunion, and my aunt looks at my dad and looks at me. She's like, you don't. So it was really cool. It was really cool.
Congratulations.
He's got a touch more gray than me, and he's a little bit taller, but we do favor each other.
Please let him see this interview. Please let him see this interview because I can feel your love for him. And I also, the fact is he gave you this guide, this advice, and then you went for your story. Tell me, take me from that point then. So he told you, go ahead and do it. And then you did. What happened next?
So he left my office. I ordered the software. I'm a fan of, this is silly, but I like to take the big yellow sticky pads and put them on the wall and I scratch out ideas. And I worked for about 10 or 15 minutes. I called a buddy, talked some things through with him, and I just started typing. And I told myself, I said, it was September going into October. And I told myself, I'm not going to shave my hair, cut my hair, anything until I get through this first episode. And I thought, it's going to take me the rest of the year. Before the year ended, I had 10 episodes and I was shaving. I was like, wow, that was way more fun than I thought it was going to be. And it came a lot easier because I would sit and I'd have these ideas and I'd keep these little tablets around and I had one by my bed and I'd write, oh, let me change this and let me add this. And these things just kept flowing. And it didn't drive me insane, but it kept me drilled in and occupied and driven. And I was like, I can do this. I didn't know where it was going to end up. I just knew that I'm going to.
What was your driving force in addition to your dad's guidance? And he said, "Do it," and you went. What was the inner? I'm interested in what's inside you that said you have to do it, because you didn't stop. Your passion was so strong, and you went for it. What was it? Tell me about the flame you had.
Okay, so this story is a little bit tougher. When I was younger, I was told that I would never amount to anything and most likely would end up on a corner somewhere selling drugs.
What are you doing to me here? What
No,
are you doing?
I mean, honestly.
What are you doing to me? You know what's happening here? You're bringing all these good stuff out, you know?
Well, thank you for letting me talk about it, Dr. Abe.
I know, go ahead.
It's cathartic to me. I'm going through some catharsis.
Okay, go ahead.
But no, I was told this, like, you're not gonna amount to anything.
Who said that to you?
My mother.
And you were how old when? No.
I was 14 and she was on her way to drop me off at a shelter home.
Well, we can say God bless her, but you are who you are now. And we love her.
Things happen the way they're supposed to.
Yes, we love her.
And that probably was what stoked my original fire. Because there are a lot of times, Dr. Abe, and I'm sure it happens with everyone, where you wake up and you're like, today I just want to quit. I want to hide under my blanket, close all the curtains and just quit. And I thought, if I ever do that, then whoever that opposing force is, and I'm not saying it was my mom, but whatever that opposing force out there wins. So I heard things like, hey, you're a foster kid, you're supposed to be a statistic. Why aren't you, a murderer or a serial killer? Why aren't you in jail? All these other things. I said, because that's what everyone else wants or thinks. It's not what I think. So, I got a job early at 16. I joined the military. I got out of the military and got more jobs and then went to culinary school and then got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate, because I always had in the back of my mind, you can't do this. And I'm like, well, watch me prove you wrong. And I'm not bragging or anything like that. I just thought the moment I quit makes everybody else right. So that also leads into how when Dad's like, why don't you just do it? I'm like, why not? That was it. It was just like that. And next thing I knew, I was writing.
Probably you needed validation, and this validation came from the person, either mom or dad. Mom affected you somehow, and dad reaffirmed your abilities. So you balanced the behavior you needed to shine and soar, and you did. Your dad the dad's word came at a time where you needed it. Because if he said the other way, probably would have ended up differently, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he validated to who you are, and now you are a doctor, you are an author, you are inspirational to others, and the future is ahead of you. The future is ahead of you. But what comes to mind, because I'm also in showbiz and I know how things are, you're going to write 5 books, which is fine. 5 books are good, and they will have probably their own audience. But you also have another story to write, your story, your own story. Story of defiance, story of determination, story of success, story of making it happen. Because you happen to be in a position or in a situation where many are in, but they don't have the role model. You can also play a role model through your books, so whatever you write, whether it's a blog or a series of blogs or a book into your own experience living in a foster home, what happened in the dynamic of family and how functional or dysfunctional, it doesn't matter. Remember, we don't judge. We suspend judgment, but we offer solutions. So people, our audience out there can benefit and be inspired and be enlightened. Because this is a human experience and we all live it. Everybody has a story. I have a story, you have a story, everybody has a story. So we share these stories with the intention for others to benefit from. So if I may suggest, all the public or otherwise, write your own story. Your own story is inspirational. This is really something to consider. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, I appreciate you letting me speak about that because there is a story. And when I was younger and probably a little less, I hate to use the term educated, but I wasn't knowledgeable in life because I was too young. And I always thought I should tell my story. I should tell my story. And I didn't really have the story I have now. I had bits and pieces, and I didn't have the wherewithal to view it from the lens that I do now. And when you see certain things happen in life, like for me, I had a situation where I saw a movie that completely edified everything I had done, but then tore my world apart simultaneously. And the movie, if I may share with you, was called Antoine Fisher.
Mm.
And I saw this, and have you ever seen that movie, Dr. Okay.
I've seen it.
So if you recall in this movie, this was a young man who joined the military after being in foster care. And I saw these images and I'm thinking, okay, I've been in the foster care system twice. I understand what he's going through. And then he joined the military. I said, I understand what he's going through.
Or something similar.
Yes. He learned to speak Japanese. I worked to speak Spanish. I learned Spanish. And I'm like,
Are you fluent in Spanish? You speak fluent?
I'm pretty decent. I won't say there's some of the larger words.
You have l'español.
See?
That's all I know. That's all I know in Spanish.
So, and then being in the military, I learned, a couple words in a lot of different languages. Maya's taught me some things in Bosnian, and I had a friend who was from Bosnia, learned a little bit of Arabic, embarrassed myself in Arabic. I've done a lot of, language things, but I was going through this story, and this guy finds his family, and his family's name was Fisher. And I thought, wow, I found my dad. His name was Fisher. I'm like, how cool is that? And I was just so caught up in the emotion of it. And then as I got further into the story and I see when he finds his aunt, this guy, she lived on Drexel. My house that I had in Tucson was on Drexel. And I'm like,
wow. It's like your story is being told in front of you.
Dr. Abe, I'm going to be honest with you. I broke down a little bit in the theater. I'm not going to lie. I was trying to hide it, but, I was like, okay, this is a tough one. And so, I'd known this story, but then I had 2 more instances of it circling back. And that was when I worked at the Culinary Institute. They had a situation where a selected person could go to Chicago to work with master chefs to do these master's classes. And they picked me, and I said, okay, cool. I opted to go, but setting up the plane trip, something went wrong. And then something went wrong with the hotel. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe I'm being told not to go. And so I kind of monitored the situation, and I started to shift my thinking and saying to myself, maybe I really do need to go. maybe that's what the universe is telling me I need to go. So I stuck with it, worked through all the issues that we ran into, all the pitfalls, got them fixed, got to Chicago, and because of what had happened, I had to spend my own money to get there. And then they said, when you get there, there'll be a check for you to reimburse you. So we went through all that. I did a couple of classes, and I'm a little bit of a night owl. I had stayed up late and had fallen asleep on the bed. And in the morning, I stayed at this place called the Palmer House. They slid a USA Today under my door. And I pick up this paper, and I read about this gentleman by the name of Chef Jeff. And Chef Jeff was the gentleman who was preparing the food for the event that we were all attending with the closing ceremonies that like Sunday night. He was a gentleman who had spent time in prison because of drugs, got out, got into food, and was doing things to help the youth. I thought that was really cool. Forgot about it. The next day I was going to breakfast and I heard this booming voice, "Hey, how you doing?" I look back and it's Chef Jeff. And I'm like, "Chef Jeff Henderson, wow." So I start talking with him. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to do a book signing later." I went and purchased this book. He signed it. I took it home. I didn't read it right away. But later on, I got into the book and I find that he was in prison. And one of the prison guards that watched over him was a guy they called Fish, Antoine Fisher. And seriously, I was just like, what are the odds?
Yes.
Like, what are the odds that this guy would actually know Antoine Fisher, the guy whose story that my life mirrored? And I was trying to get to Chicago to undertake.
And you had no conversation with him, nothing.
Other than, "Hey, thanks for buying my book and the best of luck."
Wow.
And so I was just absolutely just baffled. Like I told myself I was supposed to make that trip, and I'm glad I fought for it. A couple years later, I met someone, and she was a therapist, and I was kind of sharing bits and pieces of this story with her. She goes, "Oh, Fish, yeah, I know him. I'll introduce you." Now, I never got to meet him, but it was another person who knew him, and I just what a cool situation and unfolding of events that all those things happen surrounding this. And, finding my family, their name is Fisher, Aunt lives on, same street that I did, all these different things that had happened during, our kind of parallel.
Sometimes really the world talks to you. It's the universe communicates with you in its own way. So these are the messages you needed to hear, so you can
I agree.
Have your own way, you path your own way.
And it's funny that you mention that, because I've said something similar to friends, and I said, the thing is when the universe talks to you, you gotta listen.
The universe, regardless of what we call it, angels, God, universe, the good karma, guardian angels, they know you're good. They know internally you suffered. They know internally you are trying to reach out. So they give you an extended hand. This is our hand.
That makes sense.
Come on. I think we all feel it. We all feel it. We all have some guardian angels somehow. Could be in the form of a human being that comes our way and guide you, give you an extended hand, or be an instrument of good in your life. Or it could be that voice, the positive voice that comes into you and say, probably you should do it this way than that way. It's goodness. It's the karma that we've done probably in the past, or prayers. You never know. You never know. Could be somebody praying for you. No mother is a bad mother. No,
I wouldn't say that.
Could be a mother's prayers. Could be a mother's prayers.
Yeah, and
someone
I
you
think
care
that,
for. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that moms are bad people or anything like that. Everyone's in a different place in their life, and they make decisions based on what they see and view and are experiencing. Yes. So at the time, perhaps that was the best decision. So
did you try to reach to her later on, or are you in good terms with her now?
We're in communication. We're on good terms. There's no...
Beautiful. I thank you. I thank you for such an inspirational story. We thought we were going to talk about only the book, and your amazing book.
Thank you, Dr.
Made it amazing. You made it happen to a level where we actually get to know you. Hopefully, I will see this story on the screen one day, whether it's the novel you wrote or your own personal story, because this is a story of defiance. We all need it. People now, as we talk, they are living the situation you had, and they want to look for a shining light in their lives to emulate, to model themselves after. I am in this situation now, but I can do it. Look at Dr. James. You know, you are a shining light for others, and that's what we hope that you will achieve now or in the future. I thank you, Dr. James, for coming on.
I appreciate you for letting me tell my story, but also for the kind words that you just shared, because those types of words I think that people need to hear that help keep them focused, motivated, moving forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
You're most welcome.